Hi, this is Andre. I want to talk about MIDI control of multiple loops on the Echoplex Digital Pro. Thank you very much to Mark Oswald for commissioning this one. To control multiple loops through MIDI, you need to have a MIDI controller that will either send note commands or continuous control commands. And to make those happen, you need to come down to the second row from the top and select the control source parameter. Right now I have it set to note. You could also set it to controller, which means that you'll use continuous controller commands to access this stuff. If it's set off, then neither of those is going to work. So if you're doing any kind of MIDI control for the EDP, it needs to be set to either note or controller. I'm using note. Accessing the different loops on the Echoplex Digital Pro is done by assigning different note values to loops. The default setting for multiple loops is found under the loop trigger number parameter. The default setting is 84. That means that note 84 is going to trigger loop number 1, note 85 will trigger loop 2, 86 will trigger loop 3, and so on and so forth. You can change this to make it higher or lower if you need to. That will move the entire array of loops. So in other words, if you set that to 80, then that means loop number 1 will be 80, loop number 2 will be 81, and so forth. I keep that set to 84 because I don't really have a reason to change it. So with that configuration, the biggest difference that I personally find with using multiple loops with MIDI control is that you can jump immediately to any of the different loops. So you can go right from loop 1 to loop 3 to loop 4 to loop 2. If you're using the next loop button on the front panel, the biggest disadvantage you have, the biggest limitation, is that you have to go successively. In other words, if you want to get from loop 1 to loop 4, you have to go through loops 2 and 3 to get there. On the other hand, if you have MIDI control set up for multiple loops and you want to go from loop 1 to loop 4, you just press the loop 4 button, and there you go. So you can jump back and forth to your heart's content. And if you find that you actually want to use next loop for whatever reason, there's also a next loop option available through MIDI. So this particular MIDI command is set to basically emulate the next loop button. So you can have your cake and eat it too if you're so inclined. So by virtue of having access to each loop as its own independent MIDI button, a lot of the concepts we've been talking about in previous multiple loops videos take on a lot of new permutations. What I'm going to do is set auto record to on. I'm going to have loop copy off, switch quantize is off, sampler style I'm going to set to start. And what I'm going to do now is record a phrase, and I'm going to split that phrase across 4 different loops. So as soon as I hit loop 1, it's going to start recording because auto record is on. So there's loop 1. There's loop 2, loop 3, so I had auto record turned on, and that meant that each time I advanced through a different loop number, it stopped recording in the previous loop and began recording in the next loop that I was pressing. Let me clear all this stuff out. Long press of record, long press of multiply. Let me do that again. So that's me showing my hair metal roots ballad phase, I guess. So that's loop 1, loop 2, loop 3, and loop 4. And again, what's particularly nice if you're used to using next loop to get through your loops is that you can jump back and forth between any of the loops immediately. This is my fake Metallica ballad, I guess. So let's check out what's going on here with sampler style, because that has a lot of permutations in terms of MIDI control. Right now it's set to start. When you're using MIDI, that actually means that you can re-trigger a loop. Just by pressing that MIDI note again. Now let's look at the attack sampler style. If you were checking out the last video, you remember my saying that attack isn't relevant unless you're using MIDI control. Well, now we're using MIDI control, so it's relevant. What attack does is plays the loop for as long as you hold the pedal down, and as soon as you release it, it mutes the loop. That kind of thing. Now, let's change it from attack to 1. In the last video, I was having a lot of fun geeking out over the 1 sampler style parameter because it let you do crazy stuff like this. It would jump into the loop you selected, play it once, and then jump back to the original loop. I'm going to turn on switch quantization so that I can re-demonstrate that. So there I was jumping to loop 3, then it goes back to loop 1. Let's go to loop 4, and now jump back to loop 1 again. Let's jump to loop 2, and back to loop 1. So that's what sampler style equals 1 does if you're using the front panel button. What's a little confusing is that it does something very different if you're using MIDI control. Let's see what it does. Oh! It plays it once and then it mutes. I'm going to switch off switch quantization so that we can jump between loops immediately. This also has a re-triggering option. But then as soon as the entire loop plays, it mutes. If you want to unmute it, press unmute, or mute, which will unmute. Now, let's say that you want to be able to do that, but you also want to do that fun, jump into the next loop one time, play it, and then jump back. You can use the MIDI next loop button to get that happening. Because I have switch quantize turned off, it's jumping immediately, which is a bit of a weird sound. But hey, I really like it. Yeah, so when we jump back to loop 1, we're picking up right from where we jumped away. I had no idea it did that. You can also use the front panel. There's no reason that you can't mix and match control, so maybe I want to do the one shot with MIDI. Unmute. Etc., etc. And again, if you want to be able to do next loop without having to stoop down and reach the front panel, you can use the MIDI next loop button, and you will get the functionality that way. Now here's another MIDI exclusive multiple loops thing that's a lot of fun. I'm going to unmute loop 1. We've talked about how you can have a next loop control available through MIDI, which functions just like the next loop button. You can also have a sus next loop assigned, which means that it will jump to the next loop in line for as long as you hold the pedal down. When you release the pedal, it goes back to where you were. So I have this program to be my sus next loop. So right now we're in loop 1, now we're in loop 2. As soon as I release my foot, we jump back to loop 1. So if I go to loop 3, that's jumping to 4. There's loop 2. I've never really used this function, so I'm not doing a great job of demonstrating it, but you get the idea. Gonna have to start using it. Okay, so now let's get into some slightly more obscure features. Before we play anything, we're gonna configure things in a particular way. More loops is set to 4. That doesn't really make a difference because I always have 4 loops set up. Auto record is on. I built up some loops off camera and I was using auto record. Loop copy is off. Switch quantize is set to cycle. Sampler style is set to start. Here are 4 loops that I built up off camera. I'm going to unmute loop 1. That's loop 1. Here's loop 2. Loop 3. And loop 4. So let's look at something called double-click copying. Let's say that for whatever reason, I wanted to copy loop 1 into loop 4. There's already something in loop 4. So what you can do is double-click the loop 4 button during the waiting state. The waiting state is the state between when you push the loop 4 button and when it actually switches to loop 4. The waiting state is where you get the L1, L2, L3, L4 display. So if you press that a second time during that waiting state, then it's actually going to copy your current loop into the new loop location, like this. There we go. So now we've copied loop 1 into loop 4, and we can build that up however we want to. Then go back to loop 1. Loops 2 and 3 are still the same. And there's loop 4 that we just changed. Now you can also do that kind of loop copying using multiply in the waiting state, and that's available through the front panel as well. You don't need to be using MIDI. So if you select the new loop and then hit multiply, that will also do a loop copying. Like that. And as I say, you don't need to be using MIDI control. You can do that from the front panel or the standard foot controller as well. I like using double-click copying because it's less to have to think about. If I know that I'm here and I want to copy that into loop 4, I just hit loop 4 twice, and I'm copying. You can stop the multiply either by hitting the loop number again, or by hitting multiply, or overdub, much like if you're doing a standard multiply ending. Now, let's look at one of my favorite little tricks, which is sus unrounded multiply. I have this assigned to a sus unrounded multiply. What that does is redefines the length of the loop for however long you hold it down for. Now, it's a destructive process, which means that once you've done an unrounded multiply, you're going to have a really short loop. So if we switch back to loop 4, that's a pretty short loop length. So here's what you can do, and this is something I actually do quite a bit. You can use loop copying to copy this into loop 4, do an unrounded multiply to get a glitchy, stuttery kind of effect, and then jump back to loop 1. So you're basically using loop 4 as your target loop for that kind of thing. You keep copying that loop into loop 4, you keep destructively doing stuff with unrounded multiply, and then you go back to loop 1. And if you want to go back to what you just left, you could. But for this kind of technique, what I like doing is double-clicking into the next loop. Oh! Hit undo because I accidentally double-clicked into loop 1. Didn't mean to do that. Operator error. There we go. Alright. Thank goodness for the undo button. Now let's look at an even more obscure feature called the Snipplets trick. Yes, it's actually called the Snipplets trick. What happens is, when you're doing a loop copy, you use sus unrounded multiply as an alternate ending to the multiply. So here's what happens. You're going to double-click copy loop 1 into loop 4. Here we go. So now we're copying. I'm going to press down sus on random play, and now I'm releasing, and it immediately starts playing backwards. Let me demonstrate that a few times. Ridiculous amounts of fun to be had. I believe Andy Butler coined the term snipplets. He is the one responsible for putting it into Loop 4 in the first place. Thank you so much, Andy, for that and so many other things you've hidden inside this wonderful beast. So there's one other parameter related to multiple loops that we should talk about briefly, which is velocity. It's on the top parameter row under the undo column. Velocity allows you to change the output volume of a loop depending on the velocity setting of a note when you play it. So if you turn it on, if you play a note on your controller harder, send a higher velocity level, the loop will play back louder. If you send a lower velocity level on that triggering note, then you're going to get a lower level on your loop. I can't demonstrate this because, frankly, I can't figure out how to get my Behringer FCB 1010 foot pedal to do that. I've looked through the instructions a bit, I've tried configuring it, but I can't seem to find a way to get it to send note information that is also velocity sensitive based on how hard I'm hitting the pedal. I like the Behringer for a lot of things, but I would never accuse it of having an overly transparent user interface. So unfortunately, I can't demonstrate that aspect right now, but it's available to you if you are so inclined. So this has been a look at MIDI control of multiple loops. Thank you again very much to Mark Oswald for commissioning this one and for commissioning all of the multiple loops videos. I've had a really good time doing them and have discovered a lot of stuff that I didn't really know about beforehand, which is part of the whole reason I wanted to do this in the first place. Thank you very much to all of you for tuning in, and I will talk to you next time. Bye-bye.